Thank you for your interest in the special audio recording of a Teach 2016 workshop. This audio file is a free resource from USA, Canada Sunday School and Discipleship Ministries Regional Office. Recorded at 2016 Teach Conference held at Springdale Church of the Nazarene in Cincinnati, Ohio. We extend appreciation to the presenter who gave permission for the recording to be distributed as a training resource, and pray that it will be a blessing to your ministry. If you have any comments about the content or quality of this recording, please send them to stmi.nazarene.org or call 1-877-240-2417.
All right, well, this is the third session, and just in case you're wanting to know where we are, we're connecting to where kids are today. Hopefully that's where you were planning on being. Could somebody grab the door real quick? Just kind of quiet the noise a little bit. My name's Melody Eisenhoffer, and for 15 years I was a youth pastor, and I served on the Missouri district. We mainly had what we would call building ministries. So we would go into places that had either no youth or just a couple youth, and we would come in and build up the ministry. We would train leaders, we would train workers, and then sad to say, eventually God moves you on, and so they would take over and we would go on and we'd start from scratch again someplace else. And so a little over a year and a half ago, the district superintendent on the Northeast Indiana district called me up and asked me if we were interested in doing that with a whole church. So today I am the senior pastor at Northside Church of the Nazarene in Muncie, and we are on quite an adventure. So we've started with about 20 our first Sunday, 5 of which were our family, and right now we're running about 60. Our youth ministry runs about 30. They don't all come on Sunday mornings, but they are mostly outreach kids. Our teenagers mostly attend Muncie Central High School, which is a rough school. If you know anything about Muncie, when we moved into Muncie, everybody said, don't send your kids to Central. That's where our kids go. They go to Central. So they are missionaries there and have done quite a deal. So we're really proud of them and what they're doing and what we're doing. And I've been able to chaplain even through the band with the color guard. And I go right on the field with them and we circle up and pray right before they go on and perform. So God opened that opportunity to us, and it's been a lot of fun. So that's just a little bit about who I am. Today, our session specifically says kids, but I'm just going to be honest, this can be applicable to youth. This is applicable even to adults. And so a lot of this you can apply to most anything that you do. Our family started a ministry called Connecting to Youth quite a few years back, 5 maybe. Mainly the places that we were called and we went were places that didn't have a lot of money financially. I do have a bachelor's and a master's degree, but I want to do what God calls me to do, and that's not always where the money is. And so to help provide for our families so that we were able to do that, we started that ministry. And I would travel, and some of my kids would go with me, all over the United States to churches and help investigate in their communities what needs were really there behind the scenes, and then work with training their board members and their youth workers or children's workers, depending on what it was, and then present a plan to the church as to some things that they could do that could make a big difference in outreaching to their community. And so that is where a lot of this information is derived from. Some of this is stuff that I would teach when I was gone doing those things. So I am glad that you guys joined us today, and I hope you get something at least out of this session. Jennifer, would you go ahead and hit play? And those first blanks on your form, we'll go over them in a minute, but they come from this short video.
How important is children's ministry? Well, more than half of people who will ever believe in Christ will do so by the age of 12. And by the time the child is 9, their basic moral foundation has already been formed. By age 13, a person has formed their first basic beliefs about the nature of God reliability of the Bible, the existence of an afterlife, and the everlasting love of Jesus Christ. Through children's ministry, we have a chance to engage the hearts of these children when they are most open to the gospel. We are able to step into their lives through all the gifts like teaching, serving, administration, and evangelism. You could get a chance to share the gospel with a child for the first time in his or her life, or help them form their first thoughts of who God is. Please know we don't want this to be an obligation. We want this to be a pleasure. We want you to volunteer because you want to help your church raise its children as you raise your own. By helping us in children's ministry in any capacity, you help them see that Jesus is real.
All right, well, just to recap, excuse me, half of the people who believe in Christ will do so by age 12. A child's basic moral foundation is formed by age 9. By age 13, a person has formed their first basic beliefs about the nature of God, the reliability of the Bible, the existence of an afterlife, and the everlasting love of Jesus Christ. Children's ministry allows us to engage children when they are most open to the gospel. Absolutely. Children's ministry steps into their lives through gifts like teaching, serving, and evangelism. Helping in any capacity helps our children see that Jesus is real. The YouTube link to that's not my video. It's on YouTube. Anybody can get it for free. So if you want to get on there, that YouTube link is listed right there on your paper. It might help you recruit a few workers and share some passion. So we're going to talk about connecting to where kids are today. Kids and youth. How many of you say that that can be a challenge? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, as if that wasn't challenge enough in and of itself, there's a reason why kids act the way they do today. How many of you have heard people in church complain they're just rough and they're rowdy and they break things and they're loud and they're crazy and they're, and those are all their excuses for why they really don't even want them there? Has anybody served in a church? You don't have to say it's your church now, but has anybody served in a church that was like that? I was raised in a church that was like that. Kids were to be seen but not heard. There was no real extra special time spent with them. And in fact, I can remember as a teenager, one particular election, a man ran for NYI president. After the election, he won, and he came to my sister and I, and he said, "Is it just you and your friend Nikki that come to youth group?" And at that point in time, it was only us three that attended faithfully. And he said, "Okay, well, if it's just you, it's not worth my time." And he walked away. And he did not hold anything. There was nothing. And that was said to our face. And what was said was, "You are not important." I don't know why he ran for that election, because it makes no sense to me. But he did, and we weren't important, and he told us that. So as if it's not challenging enough, there's this thing that's called systemic abandonment. And systemic abandonment basically means this. It's what happens when all the external systems that are originally designed to nurture, protect, and help kids have changed to be self-serving. So everything that was designed to be something that would help kids grow and to feel loved and to learn all the things that they should learn have turned around and become self-serving. And we see that in many, many different ways. And some of them we're not going to like. But I will tell you this. I just speak from the heart and I shoot straight. And sometimes that's not appreciated. Sometimes it is. But, children are not getting enough love. They're not getting the love they need. They're not getting it at home. They're not getting it at school. And they honestly aren't even getting it at church. I hope that's not true for your church. But I can tell you I've been in many that is exactly the way it is. So we're going to look at home first. How many of you have had someone at home when you grew up that you could count on? Okay, maybe it was a parent. Did any of you have maybe a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle? Maybe they didn't live in your home, but there was somebody there that cared about you and nurtured you and helped you in that way. Well, the truth is, today, and I don't use this term to be rude, but that's just the way I kind of use it. Church people, okay, there's a difference between church people and a Christian. Do you get what I'm saying? You can say you're a Christian and not be a Christian. So there's a lot of church people who believe, and you could even be a Christian and still need work done. God's still working on us. Well, I need a big construction sign on me that says, under construction. Be careful, caution. But there's a lot of church people who believe that the world is the way that they saw it when they were kids or when they were raising their kids. And so they see things in a different perspective. They think, I took care of my kids, therefore these kids get taken care of. I fed my kids, therefore these kids get fed. I loved my kids, therefore these kids get loved. And the unfortunate truth is that is not the case. It's just not the case today. We were cared for, we were clothed, we were fed. We did those things for our kids, those of us that already have kids. I mean, I do. How many of you had help with homework? Okay, those are things we take for granted. As adults, some of us gave help to our kids with homework. We take for granted those things. Had people who even cared where we were or what we were doing. And so kids today have that too, right? Wrong. I absolutely agree. 14.7 million children live in poverty in the U.S. today. Now, the statistics that I'm going to give you, I find that there are three kinds of people in the church. There are those who are completely aware and want to do something about it. There are people who are kind of aware, but they just don't want to know any more about it. And then there are people who completely bury their heads in the sand and pretend like it's not there at all. Okay? But the truth of the matter is, statistics say, you can find these on the internet, 14.7 million children live in poverty today. That's a lot. 15.8 million children live in food insecure homes. That means they do not have food readily available to them. 40% of families in America live in homes with housing problems, such as, or inadequate housing, no housing, or crowded housing. One of the big trends today is that you will have 3 or 4 families that live in houses together because they can't afford to live in houses on their own. And we're not talking about great big houses. We're just talking about little space and lots of people. 1 in 5 children is at risk of hunger in the United States. Among African American and Latino, the rate increases to 1 in 3. So here's a question. How many of you have heard kids say that their parents don't care? Has anybody heard that? Well, when I was a kid and I would hear people say that, I just kind of like dismissed it and thought, they care, they just don't like what their parents have to say, or whatever. But how many of you think that kids really are just overreacting when they say that? Sometimes they are. That's true. Sometimes they are. But I'm here to tell you guys that that might be truer than you think. In my first youth ministry, we decided to go out and to do an outreach project. And so we took our youth ministry out to a pavilion at the park. And we picked this pavilion because the skate park was like down here. And there was a huge hill. At the top of the hill, there was some flat ground and then a big pavilion. So we would blast our Christian music and play all kinds of crazy games to get their attention. And they would wander up and they would join in. And we would feed them hot dogs and give them water or Coke or whatever we had. And they would stay for our service. And we would do our service out there in the park. Well, fall came, we continued, but by the time the end of fall came, it started getting really cold, and we couldn't continue to have it at the park. And so we transferred it back to the church, and all of the kids still wanted to come. So we just started taking the bus and going and picking them up and taking them to the church. Well, I was a young mom, and it just dawned on me one day, I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier, you know, as a parent, I would want to know where my kid was. So I need to go and introduce myself to these parents and let them know where their kids are. Well, you're talking about like 12 kids, okay, 12 different households. There was only one kid per house that was attending our youth group. And I would go knock on the door, and all of them, with one exception, said something to the effect of, I don't care as long as they're not here. I don't care where my kid is as long as they're not here. One parent we built really strong relationships with, and she got involved in our youth ministry, and her daughter was a pretty big part of our youth ministry until the day we left there. But can you imagine a world where that's what their parent says? I don't care as long as they're not here.
I drive a school bus, so I see a lot of that.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me. In Bluffton, Missouri, I went there and did a Connecting to Youth thing, and I went throughout the community, and I talked to a Christian organization who had been given an office space. It was basically an old pool, the old city pool, and they had turned it into a skate park. And the city said, if you will help watch over the kids that get dropped off at this skate park, we'll give you this building for free. And so they would operate this building, and they'd keep an eye on the kids at the skate park at the same time. And so when I was there doing Connecting to Youth, they said to me, Melody, you would be shocked what we see. These kids get dropped off as young as 4 years old at 8 o'clock in the morning when this place opens, and when we leave at midnight, there are still kids here. They're not left with any food. They're not left with anything to drink. They're just dropped off so that mom and dad don't have to mess with them during the day. And then she said sometimes we have to drive them home because nobody knows who was coming to get them or if they were coming to get them. They had a 4-year-old who would come up to their office door, and he'd knock on the door, and he would say, do you have anything for me to eat today, Miss Cheryl? And Cheryl said, Melody, one day the only thing I had was a zucchini somebody had dropped off, a raw zucchini. Somebody had just left it, had brought it to her. I grew it in her garden, said, hey, do you want this? And she said, well, sweetheart, you know, this raw zucchini is all I have. And he said, I'll take it. And he sat on their porch, and he ate a raw zucchini because he had nothing to eat that day. I mean, these are the things that real kids here in America really deal with. They don't all have people who care about them. 80% of child fatalities are from abuse and or neglect in the United States. I read just last week about a 3-year-old that was left at home while his parents went a mile away to play Pokemon Go. And when the police called and told Dad, you need to come home, he said, whatever, and hung up on them. And that was printed in the newspaper. So it just is amazing. And we live all around it. And the truth is, the only way we're going to see it is if we choose to open our eyes and pray and ask God to show us what we can do about it. 40.6% of all births are to unmarried women. That's not there to say anything bad about unmarried women. It's just simply the fact that that's a single parent home, and that's just so you realize that means one income, and that reverts back to the poverty issue that we have today in America.
It's not just unmarried women, it's also people born to unmarried men as well.
That's true.
Just they're not the ones having them.
That is true. Just so you guys know a little bit about where I came from. I was raised in the church. Were any of you guys raised in the church? I was raised in the church. My parents were there every time the doors were open. We did choir, we did caravans, we did, you know, if it was going on, we were there. And I had two great Christian parents. However, we were latchkey kids, and that was normal in that day. My parents both worked, so we would come straight home. We would take ourselves to school, and we would come straight back home, and we'd stay at home until my parents got home. Well, unbeknownst to my parents, I was abused by one of my brothers, both physically and sexually, for most of my childhood, until I was old enough to fight back, and then he would just beat me up every day. And, you know, what that left was a couple different things: a hole in my heart, and a need to feel love, and a deep question of whether God was really real and whether Christianity was really all that it was cracked up to be. Because while I was surrounded by people and they could see the way I acted, all the classic red flags were all there. No one ever asked to help. They never asked the questions. Nobody ever did anything. And in fact, I was grown up and was already a pastor, and my senior pastor's wife from when I was a kid, my mom had called her when I finally told her. I was grown up and had kids when I finally told my parents. And she had called her and told her. And she called me and she said, "I knew that had to be what was going on." And my first thought was, "And you did nothing about it."
Exactly.
And you did nothing about it. I looked to friends to fill that void. I looked to boys. I looked to drugs. I looked to alcohol. And it took getting to the bottom of the barrel where I everything I had planned, I didn't know what was going to happen now. As a pregnant 17-year-old, during a revival service, I knelt down at an altar and I gave my heart to Christ. And if I had not gotten pregnant, I'm just being honest, I don't know where I would be today. And my daughter stands in the back of the room. She'll be 20 in January. But that, I think, is one of the reasons I have such a heart and a passion to see those who are neglected and abused, those who live in poverty, those who a lot of people don't even want in the church. I want to see them reached. I was labeled the bad kid. Now, there were reasons, obviously, for that, for the way in which I behaved and the things that I did. But I don't believe there are bad kids. I believe there are things that lead them to act the way that they act. And it takes somebody who's willing to love them with Christ's love to see what is going on. Let's go on to at school. Teachers have to spend more time today prepping kids for tests than for anything else. And if you are a teacher or you know a teacher, you know that that is true. They're not allowed to hug them anymore, or really, we're not even supposed to say, "I love you, I care about you, you know what I mean, you mean a lot to me." All those things that kids who aren't getting it at home need to hear, we're not allowed to say anymore. And just hugging them, and I know a lot of teachers that do it even though we're not supposed to, but you're not supposed to. And if they find out, they put a stop to it. But those are the things kids need. They need to know that they're loved, and they need that human contact. They need to know somebody cares. And unfortunately today, even beyond that, teachers have to spend all their time focusing on just preparing them for a test that really means nothing in the end. It doesn't help them in the way in which they need. 70.5% of American students receive free or reduced lunches. That just goes back to poverty. 11 million students receive free breakfast at school each day. I know teachers who tell me they don't even send notes home to parents anymore to tell them if their kids have acted up, because they hear what what they go through when they find out that they've, been bad at school, and it's worse than just dealing with it at home or at school themselves. And our system is just broken. I don't know how many of you are youth pastors or children's pastors or maybe have had to report situations before. I've reported more than I care to admit. Well, one's more than I care to admit, but I have had to report many, many, many. And it's a disappointment to say there have been times that they've come back and said, this has gone on so long, this child will never be in that home again, and within 6 months they're right back where they started. And that's the best cases that I've dealt with. It's a rough system. At church, like I said, we don't like to admit it, but we have fallen short. As a pastor of, 16 years now, I used to get really, really upset with church people. That they didn't get kids, that they didn't get teenagers, that they didn't want them there. And maybe some of you have some of those in your church now that they just seem very aggressive towards or very negative. They just wish they would disappear. I can't tell you how many kids and how many teens I've seen leave churches because of the ways people have treated them and have never come back. We had a ministry in Fulton, Missouri, and one of the first things when we got there that was said to us was, do you care about what nationality kids are? Do you care what color their skin is? Do you care, I'm like, why? No. Why would we care about that? And a friend of mine, who was the one asking, said, well, they were missionaries in Brazil, and they had come into town and they joined a different church at first, and they started bringing a whole busload of kids that they just fell in love with that happened to be African American. And after doing it for 2 months, the board called them in one day and said, we don't want those kids here anymore.
Well, they quit calling yourself church.
Right. In Jefferson City, Missouri, their pastor was talking to me one day, and he said, we just stopped having it because the congregation felt like the teenagers were just too rough, and we just stopped having services for them altogether. Because that fixes it, right? Right. One of the other churches that I went to, when he first started talking to me, he said, Melody, they just don't want them there because they've damaged the church property. And, this is what I can tell you guys. I can tell you, for all the years that I've done ministry, I have less trouble with what I call street kids or kids who are not churched or unchurched than I do with church kids. And Samuel's the exception. I told him that earlier. There are always in every church families and kids who say they're Christian, but the way they act is not Christian, and they can be hateful and they can be nasty. But I can tell you, I would take any street kid any day of the week, because when they know that you love them, they will do anything that you ask, and they're hungry to learn more. If your church does not have outreach for children or for youth, you need to get involved in that, because kids want to be loved. They need to be loved. In our first youth ministry, we had a young man named Justin who came in, and he came into a lock-in. We had youth ministry, I think, maybe a month, and we had our first event, and it was a lock-in. At that point, we had, 10 kids maybe, and only 3 of our kids even came, and there were 25 kids here, and none of them had been invited. I don't know where they came from, but Justin and a few of his friends showed up at this event, and they had tattoos and long greasy hair and ripped pants, and you know what I'm talking about. They showed up, and our kids, welcomed them in, and we had a great time. And afterwards, my husband went and took, with another leader, and took the boys home that needed to go home, and some of our church kids were left. And I walked up to him, and I was excited, because this is the first time in my home church that I had ever seen anyone who was unchurched ever walk in the doors. because that's the way it was. It was a very traditional church. It was just for church people, you know, and so I was thrilled and so excited. And so I'm like, do you know those boys? And the girls went, yeah. And I said, you should invite them to youth group. And they went, why? And I'm like, because they need Jesus? Justin kept coming to youth group, and the first time he walked into youth group itself, he walked right in and he stuck out his hand and he said, hi, I'm Justin, and I've been kicked out of every youth group in town. And I said, well, hi, Justin, I'm Melody, and I've never kicked anybody out of youth group. I'm so glad you're here. And that was the beginning of a great friendship, and he was an awesome kid. We would pick him up for youth group every week, and he came faithfully. And I remember in our little room that we had, it wasn't much bigger than this, to be honest. It was a little chapel in that church, and there weren't any pews, or there were pews, but there weren't any altars or anything like that. And I remember one night when I gave an invitation, Justin was kneeling at the front of the front pew, and he was just sobbing. And that night he gave his heart to Jesus. And he started coming not just every Wednesday night, but pretty soon he was coming every Sunday morning, and then Sunday night. And then the teenagers are like, we want more. So can we have Sunday night youth and Wednesday night youth? And I'm like, well, sure. So he would come to all of it. And there was not a day that went by that he was not there. Now, unfortunately, God moved us on to another church, and the church that he was at lost interest in him. No one would pick him up. No one brought him to church. And, you know, something I forgot to tell you about Justin was, Justin, when he started coming, was 17. He'd been kicked out of school for the last time. They wouldn't accept him back. He was an alcoholic and he was a drug addict at 17 years old. Justin was the product of rape. And although his mom chose to give birth to him and to keep him, she told him about it every day. And Justin, in his own words, was, Melody, I became trash because that's what my mother told me I was every day of my life. Now, when the church lost interest in him, Justin went right back to the way that he had lived before. And not too long ago, we've tried to keep in contact with him, and along the way, because of his problems, he's not on Facebook and he doesn't have access to all the things. And so I don't know if he ever gets our stuff anymore or not, but one of our old students sent me a message, and she said, Melody, I saw Justin the other day. Now, they live in Missouri. That's where we're from, and we live out here. But she said, I saw Justin the other day, and I tried to get him to come back to church, and he wasn't interested. But she said, I asked him a question. I asked him, why did you come to church when you did? And he said, because Melody and David loved me. And when nobody else loved me, they loved me. And I want you guys to know that's what kids need. We're called in Scripture to be there for the orphans and the widows and those who are poor and downtrodden and depressed. And that's what these kids are. These kids are basically orphans. Emotionally, spiritually, that's what they are. Some of them might actually have parents, but they don't parent them. Systemic abandonment actually means that parents today are, at least, we're like 3 generations deep in this for most families, some families more. So you're talking about children who are being parented by parents who were never parented or grandparented, grandparents who were never parented and maybe grandparented, and great-grandparents who were never parented or grandparented. So these are kids who are parented by people who maybe even want to parent but have no idea how to parent. So I'm not saying all parents are bad. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying these parents of these kids probably have no clue how to love anyone effectively because they have never been truly loved the way God meant for it to be. This is where we are. That's where Justin was. He needed to know that somebody cared about him. But I can tell you this, there is hope. He called the little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of a child is the greatest. Whoever takes the lowly position of a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." This is what we are called to do. We are called to welcome children, called to welcome the downtrodden. "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven will always see the face of my Father in heaven." Matthew 18:10. Guys, this is what I can tell you. Nothing is impossible. I don't tell you all this so that you get defeated or so that you sit around depressed and sad and feel overwhelmed. I tell you this because it is real. The children we sit beside, the children that walk by us on the street, the children that go to our kids' schools, or maybe you teach and they go to your school, this is what many of them face every single day. And they need to know that somebody out there cares about them, that somebody out there is willing to see past the fact that they curse or yell and get angry and see them as a child of God. Someone who maybe curses because that's what's spoken in their house, and they don't know any different. I taught preschool in 2 different schools, and in one of my classes, we sat down to drink our, our apple juice, and 2 of the little boys on the end are like, "I'm getting drunk," as they're drinking their apple juice. And I'm like, no, this is a Christian preschool. We don't get drunk here. And they're like, "Everybody gets drunk." And I'm like, "I don't get drunk." And they're just kind of like, "Really?" The reality that people live in is not the reality that we necessarily live in. And like I said earlier, I used to get mad at church people. But then one day I sat down and I was talking to my dad. And I was trying to explain everything that I taught you guys here today, and trying to get across to him what I teach when I would go and teach connecting to youth places. And he sat there. I talked to him, I'm not making this up, like 3 hours. And finally he looked at me and he said, "So what you're telling me is there really are parents who don't take care of their kids?" And I'm like, "Yes! You get it!" I have been told for youth ministries, I get passionate. I will defend those kids because they need somebody to defend them. We had a youth ministry, our last youth ministry had grown to about 50 before we left, and it's a small town, actually. But we were focused on outreach, and it grew to about 50 kids, and those kids were good. We fed them every week. We fed them Sunday mornings. We fed them on Wednesday nights. And every kid that came through there would say thank you every time. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. And those that came on Sunday mornings would sit there, and if they said anything, it was a question. It might be like, "What did he mean by that?" They're taking notes. We had notebooks sat right in front. They all sat in the front on the left-hand side. And we had notebooks for all of them and pens, and they would take notes of the service. They would hand over their cell phones, believe it or not. Before service started, they all went in a basket, and they'd show us their notes at the end to get their phones back. And they might lean over and say, "What is that?" Or "What verse was that found in?" I ran into the senior adult classroom one day. I was walking by it, and they were bad-mouthing our kids, and they were calling them hooligans and stuff like that. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Senior adult classroom?
Yeah. I was walking by, and they're like talking about our kids and how horrible it is. And I'm like, "Guys, it's life in your church. It's life." There's more adults that talk in the church service than there are teenagers that talk. And if they're talking, I know what they're talking about. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I know what they're talking about. And no, not all senior adults are that way. That was just this class. It's not even just kids. I can't help but share this. I shared it with your mom last night. This particular church, the thing that bothers me is when we get saved, sanctified, and then petrified, and we think that we've made it. That sanctification is not something that we can lose, and that we are somehow earthly perfected and can't go any further. I got a call from a friend of mine who was pastoring this church, and he said to me, Melody, I have to get angry for a minute to somebody who's going to understand what I'm talking about. And I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to hear me. I'm like, okay. And he said, well, Denny came to church today. I was excited. Denny was a poor old man who had been homeless for years. As long as I had known him, he was homeless. Back in the day, my uncle tells me he was the top electrician in the whole state of Missouri. If something was being built, that's who they called. And Denny lost his wife and his daughter to a drunk driver. And ironically, he turned to the bottle, and he lost everything. And as long as I can remember, my uncle would have food set aside for him, or he would go to a place and pay for a meal for him so Denny could stop by there and get something. And he had tried for years to get Denny to come to church. Well, that morning, Denny came to church. And he came in and he sat in that same Sunday school classroom with those same people. And one lady stood up, marched out of the classroom, slammed the door, and loud enough for the whole church to hear, said, I don't know which worse, the stinking coffee in the coffee room or the stinking drunk in my Sunday school class.
Wow.
And he stood up very politely, and he walked out of the church. And he was killed that week while he slept in a parking lot. I'm glad I'm not that woman. That's all I can say. God help us. God help her. I pray often that her heart has changed or will change, because that's not what we're called to be. Nothing is impossible, but it all starts with you guys loving people, whether it's little kids to teenagers, senior adults, and even stinky homeless people. I tell my kids often, it doesn't matter, when you come to church, it doesn't matter what you wear, it doesn't matter what you look like, and it doesn't even matter what you smell like. And I throw that in there on purpose because of that situation. Where do we start? You need to identify the needs in your church and what your church is called to address. We're all called to something different. So what I feel called to and what you feel called to might not be the same thing. We need to find ways to reach and to fill those specific needs. You need to think outside the box. I always tell people, as long as it's not against our doctrine and it's not unbiblical, it's not it's not off limits. So we have to think differently. We need to provide a safe environment. If you are not part of NASSAFE yet, you need to get NASSAFE. A lot of churches are not. I do want to tell you this. If you are not NASSAFE and there is a sexual abuse claim against your church, you are on your own. The denomination will not back you up.
That's what NASSAFE is about.
NASSAFE is, yes. NASSAFE is not only background checks, but it's training and that kind of thing. Every church I went to for connecting to youth, from the smallest church to the largest church, none of them were NASSAFE when I went and spoke to them. Being NASSAFE is very important. We need to know that our workers are not only trained, but they are background checked and they are safe for our children and to be around them. So please check into that if you are not. We need to care about people first. Can I just tell you this? Stuff will get broken. Okay? It shouldn't be a surprise. Yeah, Jenny.
In our church, it would be like that.
You can ask me about that later, but you need to care about people first. Okay, I have been in I don't know how many churches that's their number one deal is, oh, if we have a large youth group, things will get broken. So what?
Right.
You know what? I would rather have things breaking and people going to heaven than have the most pristine castle in the world and be surrounded by people, right, who are losing their souls for eternity.
I'd rather help fix the kid's heart than worry about breaking it.
Absolutely. We have kids at our house all the time, and with our 3 children. And I remember one day, Daniel and this other kid were running through the house, and they ran by my mother's hutch. And I heard something fall and break, and I thought, oh. And I went over there, and it was, we don't drink, but it was a little goblet that my mom had bought for both of David and I when we got married. We drank out of it when we got married. And she cried. This little girl just cried. And I said, sweetheart, it's okay. It's a thing. You know, it's a thing. But isn't it important? No, it's a thing. Right. You're important. You know, and that's what people need to know. They are important. I can tell you now that I'm a senior pastor, children and teens will always have a special place in my heart. But even working with adults need to know that too, that they are important. They're more important than stuff or the way you look. I had a family that just started, well, they started coming to our church about a year ago. And we're always involved in our kids' lives, and our oldest daughter is in color guard and is one of the color guard captains this year. Their color guard won state last Saturday. But they did an awesome job. But I remember when we first came in, there's this family that we had started building relationships with, and they had left a church 10 years ago, had never been back because of something someone had done. And some other people in the band and stuff don't apparently get along with them. I don't know because I stay out of that stuff. But that's what she was telling me. She said, oh, you don't want to be seen with us. You don't have to sit with us because, you know, other people won't like you if you do. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care what they think. I'm going to sit with whoever I want to sit with. That's right. I'm like, come on, let's go find a seat. And today they're some of the most involved families in our church. But, you know, they hadn't attended a church in over 10 years. And that was what was important to them was, well, I don't want you to tarnish your reputation. I don't care about my reputation. People are important. People are important. Be a family. We need to invest in lives. You know, that's the thing that's always been important to us in ministry, and I truly believe that's why God blesses us, is first we put God first, but we love people like their family. And I do believe church should be family. We've gotten calls at all hours of the day and night. I can remember Justin calling well into the wee hours of the morning, and one night in particular, his friends had dumped him somewhere and just left him, and he's like, I don't even know where I am, but you know, we'll come get you. Of course, he got a lecture the whole way home about who his friends really were, but that's what family does, isn't it?
Doesn't mean you have to accept the behavior.
No.
You still have to hold them accountable.
Absolutely.
You do it with love.
That's right. Yeah, you can't. That's right. You can't accept bad behavior just because you love them. We had a teenager who, his great aunt had adopted them. They had been abused when they were really small, and she had adopted them. And I remember one day he just stopped wanting to come to church, and it had to do with seeing what he could get away with and that kind of thing. But my husband went and got him out from under the bed, and he came to church. And the next Sunday, I remember she said, no, he's not here again. He's under the bed. But I don't want David to go over there because he was embarrassed. You know, well, maybe he needs to be. But she said to me, Melody, I love him too much to discipline him. And I looked at her and I said, Phyllis, if you love him, you will discipline him. And if you do not discipline him, you do not love him. And so that is absolutely correct. You can't continue the behavior, but they need to know that when you correct them, I love you.
Yeah. They need to know if they get drunk
Right.
and need a ride home, they can call you.
Right.
Even though they're probably going to be in a lot of trouble, but it's not
Absolutely.
the end of the world.
Yeah, they're not going to, they need to know that you're going to be there, even though they're in trouble, but that you care enough that you will be there for them no matter what. And that's the thing that they, that they need. They need to know, even in my darkest moments, this person or this church is going to be there for me. They're not going to turn their backs on me just because I'm this or this or this. They still love me, and God still loves me. And I think that's one of the most important things we need to remember is we are all sinners. But God loves all of us. And we need to remember that whether we've been a Christian for 99 years or for one day, that God's love hasn't changed. And even when we're still in sin, He still loves us. And, some of these people, what they need, these children, these teenagers, these adults, what they need to know is you love them. Doesn't mean you accept their sin, but you love them even in their sin. Does that make sense? Because that's the way God loves us. That doesn't mean He says, oh, your sin's okay, but I still love you even when you are living in sin.
My favorite saying that I tell the youth that we reach out to is, I love you enough to make you hate me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. And I'll tell you, and if you don't like it, that's too bad, but I love you enough to make you
Right.
hate me.
Yep. We've had kids show up at our doorsteps at all hours of the night. Mom and Dad are fighting, and I don't want to be there, or this or that. And I know for some of you that's not what your calling is. Maybe you have to have more limits than that. But I can tell you that you might be the only family some of these kids ever have. They need someone to be their moms and dads, and their aunts and uncles, or their grandparents, or their brother and their sister. Somebody who, for once, whether it's blood related or not, cares about them enough to tell them the truth and to help them overcome. Now, can I tell you that we've had 100% success and that they're all saved and going to heaven? No, I can't tell you that. And I'll tell you, that's one of the hardest things in ministry, is watching people, no matter their age, that because you taught them right and wrong, and that they know God loves them, and they know what they should do, still walk in misery because that's what they're choosing. But I can tell you this, I talked about it last night, you might not get to see the seed grow. You might be the one that planted it. And for someone else, you might be the one that watered it. And for some of them, you might be the one that gets to see them grow. But maybe you weren't the one that planted the original seed. And so I just want you guys to know it is a privilege to get to work with people. And it's hard. My kids can tell you, we have seen the best of people, and we have seen the worst of people. But I will tell you, every soul that is won makes it all worth it. Every soul, even just one, makes all the pain, all the heartache worth it when they finally get it. And the only way they can get to that point is when Christians and churches choose to see the truth, to see, whether it's poverty or whether it's just the systematic abandonment that we see all around us, and choose to step up and say, I'm not just going to admit that it's there, but we're going to choose to be part of the solution. And I do believe that the church is probably the biggest key in seeing this change in the years to come. This is a problem that is generations in the making. And it will take generations to change. But you can start with one today. There underneath, you also have some statistics on disabilities. I just thought that was important for you to know. As far as church and working with kids and teens, adults too, but the statistics on disabilities have gone up as well, and that's something to be aware of. But thank you guys for coming today, and I hope you go out and make a difference. If you have questions or thoughts, or you want to brainstorm or something like that, feel free to contact me. There are some cards over there if you want them. The address is wrong. The email address, the website, and the phone number is still correct.